Okay, and you are live.
I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Akron Police Towing Review Board. I'm going to start with a roll call of the members. When I announce your title, please state your name. The mayor's designee, that's myself. I'm Chris Reese. The chief of police or his designee.
Captain Augustino Bocosi.
Chairperson of the Public Safety Committee of City Council.
Councilman Donnie Kamer, Ward 7.
Thank you. The service director or his designee.
Yes.
Francia Losh.
Present.
Okay. The municipal clerk of courts or her designee.
Debbie Walsh.
Thank you. And finally, the towing company's designee.
John Turgo.
Well, I think that's Dole Miller.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. The board member.
Yeah, I'm here. Dow Miller, Miller's Towing.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. We have a quorum, 6 of 8 members, and we're going to proceed. The purpose of today's meeting is to conduct a hearing on a report of a towing company violating Akron City Ordinance 70.50 through 70.55 or 70.57. I am required as the chair to read the following about today's hearing. The board hears cases involving allegations, alleged violations of the applicable city ordinances by the district towing companies. Representatives of the city, owners, lessees, and persons in possession of towed vehicles and other interested parties will be recognized and given an opportunity to be heard concerning the particular matter. Any person appearing today that intends to speak at a hearing on a particular matter will be sworn in to attest to the truth of his or her testimony. I now ask that anyone wishing to speak at this hearing or testify to be sworn in by Mr. York.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jay and John Turgo, I believe you'll be testifying. And Sergeant Lipa as well. Will anyone else be testifying today? Okay, if I could get the 3 of you to, first of all, turn on your microphones so that we can hear you. John Turgo, could you unmute your microphone?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Okay. Do the 3 of you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. York. The order of presentation today shall be as follows, with the chair recognizing those wishing to speak and offering opportunity for rebuttal and alteration to this order of presentation as the chair deems appropriate to orderly and efficiently conduct the business of the board. First, the city will present a summary of the history of the alleged violation or violations. Second, those claiming that the alleged violation occurred will be given an opportunity to be heard. And then third, those denying or wishing to address the alleged violations will be heard. The chair may give either party additional opportunities to respond at my discretion. After all parties have had the opportunity to speak, the board will deliberate and issue a decision on the violations and any penalty. Members of this board may ask questions of any speaker at any point in this process upon being recognized by the chair. The chair has the discretion to establish time limits for the speakers as the situation may arise. That's how the hearing will be conducted today. So we'll begin with the city will present a summary of the history of the alleged violations, and I believe I will recognize Sergeant Lepa of the Akron Police Department to provide that summary. Sergeant?
Hello, I'm Sergeant Lipa. I'm in charge of the information desk, which handles all the tow complaint or tows, and officers give me complaints as they come in, and I document all complaints attached to, I believe everyone got an email attached with all the complaints, and it was just, there's other tow companies that had complaints, but the one that you received were Johnny's complaints. Do you want me to read? There were 15 complaints total in the email that was sent to everyone. Do you want me to read each complaint?
Mr. Chair, if I could address that, Sergeant, it would, at this point, it would be appropriate for you to give a summary of each alleged violation so that the board can hear about each one. And then if more details necessary, you could always circle back on that.
Okay, great. So the first complaint I got was November 2nd, 2020. It was 2 cars needed towed and Johnny's was contacted. Johnny sent 1 tow truck and stated that he would have to take one of the vehicles back to the tow yard and return for the second vehicle. Owners started responding to the scene, trying to take vehicles. Greg's Towing was contacted to tow 3 vehicles from the scene because they found out another vehicle needed towed. They showed up within 8 minutes with 2 trucks and had the vehicles gone within 10 minutes. Next complaint was November 20th, 2020. Johnny's Towing was notified to tow a vehicle at I-77 at the ramp to Archwood at 18:51 hours. At 19:14 hours, officers called for an ETA and was advised it would take another 15 minutes. The officer canceled Johnny's and Greg's Towing was contacted. Greg's had vehicles loaded and ready to leave when Johnny's showed up. Johnny's was not canceled because dispatch was unable to make contact with them. December 15th, 2020, accident at 139 West Long, where there were parts and glass all over the roadway. The officer was working on the report when Johnny's arrived to tow the vehicle. Johnny's left the scene with the vehicle, but did not clean up the parts or glass. The officer flagged down a city crew to clean up the mess. The officer captured the mess on his BWC, which that BWC was also attached in the emails. Let's see here. On December 18th, 2020, officer called for a tow of a traffic complaint and Johnny's Towing was contacted. Other units were in line on services waiting for a tow. So officer asked for an ETA. Johnny responded with a 20-minute ETA from the time the officer asked. Johnny's was canceled and Greg's was contacted and responded quickly. The same officer called for a tow at 881 Berghoff and Johnny was still backed up. Greg's was contacted again and responded promptly. January 15th, 2021, officer called for a tow of 2 Jeeps and Johnny's responded. After spending over an hour trying to get the tow vehicles on the flatbed, he realized he could not. The driver had one on the back of the flatbed and the other was hooked up to the arms on the rear of the tow. The driver then drove a few feet and realized the Jeep wheels were locked up. He then left with only 1 Jeep and said he would return for the other Jeep. This process took a few hours from when the tow was originally called. March 12th, 2021, Johnny's Towing responded to tow 2 vehicles after an accident. While attempting to secure one of the cars on the flatbed of the tow truck, the tow operator lost control of the car and the vehicle rolled back into the other car that needed towed. March 13th, 2021, accident at East Wilbeth and Allendale where 2 vehicles needed to be towed. Johnny's was called and the response time was inadequate. Johnny struggled to tow the vehicle and the officer asked if he had oil dry for the ramp. Johnny said it was not on the truck, but he would return with oil dry. He left with the bumper of the towed vehicle dragging and it eventually fell off. Officers had to retrieve the bumper as Johnny's kept driving. Johnny's finally came back with oil dry for the ramp to free up the officer blocking traffic. Tow was called at 17:16 hours and the officer was finally able to clear at 18:51 hours. March 19th, 2021, Johnny's was contacted to tow 2 vehicles. One tow arrived and said the second tow truck was en route. When the officer asked the first tow driver for the ETA of the second tow, he was advised that there was no second tow and that the first tow would have to drop off the first car and return for the second. The officer contacted another tow company to have the second vehicle towed. March 19th, 2021, Johnny's Towing was contacted about towing a semi that was broke down in the center lane of I-77. After a long wait, Johnny's was contacted about an ETA and they were informed that Johnny's was bought out by Interstate and that a large tows would be coming out from Twinsburg. The tow was canceled and Stan's Towing was contacted. This call started at 11:09 hours and ended at 13:46 for the removal of the semi. April 1st, 2021, I-77 north at the Central, a car was flipped behind the guardrail. Johnny's arrived with a flatbed and advised the officer that a rotator truck would be needed and it would be coming from Twinsburg. Greg's Towing was called and removed the vehicle and cleaned up in 25 minutes. April 17th, 2021, two-car accident in East Wilmington, Virginia, where one vehicle was flipped. Johnny's arrived and said that he would have to flip the car first, load it, and then take it to the tow yard. He said that he would have to return for the second vehicle because he was the only one working. Greg's Towing was called and arrived and towed the second vehicle away before Johnny's had the first vehicle flipped. Johnny's Towing responded to an accident involving 3 vehicles that needed to be towed. Johnny's only had 1 truck and driver working in Akron today. Another tow company had to be called to pick up the 3rd vehicle. September 15th, 2021, Johnny's Towing was notified at 16:37 hours that 2 vehicles needed to be towed. At 16:46 hours, Johnny said that they were en route. Johnny's arrived at 17:14 hours and was able to load up 1 vehicle under the flatbed. At 17:38 hours, the driver advised he could not tow the second vehicle and called for another tow truck. The second tow arrived at 17:45 hours to tow the second vehicle. October 2nd, 2021, Johnny's Towing was called to an accident at 76 East, Route 8 North to tow 1 vehicle. It took Johnny's 35 minutes to respond to the scene, causing 2 cruisers to block traffic. Officers were on the call from 13:50 hours to 14:39 hours. February 7th, 2022, officers called for a tow at Virginia and Georgia, and they called for that tow at 18:12 hours. The officers checked on the status of the tow at 08:52 hours, and Johnny's arrived at 09:17 hours. Johnny's response time for the tow was 65 minutes. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Sergeant. Secondly, before I recognize a representative of Johnny's to speak to the allegations, is there anybody who would like to further speak claiming the alleged violations occurred? Seeing or hearing none, I'll recognize at this time any representative from Johnny's Towing Company who wishes to either deny the violation or address the violations individually or as a whole. I see John Turgo is on. Mr. Turgo, would you like to be heard?
Yes, sir. First, I want to apologize to the city for Johnny's. That is I can't even have words for it. Secondly, we have changed our procedure there at Johnny's. We've added people and equipment to cover the area in a timely manner like it should have been when all these problems began. Again, I apologize. I'm not denying it. I was not there on the scene. I wish I was, because it would have never occurred. But like I said, we have added equipment, added people. And I apologize to the city for any type of inconvenience it's caused.
Thank you, Mr. Turgo. I see Jay Turgo is also online. Jay, would you like to be heard on any of the allegations?
Sure, as my father had said, good afternoon, everybody, first of all. Secondly, I can't apologize enough. This isn't how we conduct our business. We've been in business for 45 years. As many know, we purchased Johnny's back in 2017, just to better the brand. The business has been in your city since 1926. We want to see it there for many more years. I was just put in place of overseeing the operation as of first of this month. This was thrown in my lap here as of yesterday, and I did send an email out to Ward 7 here earlier this morning. I don't know if anybody had time to review it or not. Just apologizing, just trying to focus on what I'm going to put into place immediately so this does not happen again.
Thank you, Mr. Turgo. Thank you for participating today. Is there anybody else on behalf of Johnny's Auto or Johnny's Towing that wishes to be heard on these allegations?
No, sir.
Okay, seeing nobody else that may want to speak on this matter at this time or at this phase of the hearing, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing where we hear testimony and evidence of the violations. We'll move into the portion of the hearing where the board deliberates and decides on the violations. At this time, I'll open the meeting up to anybody on the board who would like to ask any questions or make any observations with regard to the allegations, either individually or as a whole. If you would like to, just raise your hand and I'll recognize you. Mr. Lash.
Yes, this question goes out to either Mr. John Turgo or Jay Turgo. But in lieu of what you have heard this afternoon, what corrective actions are you going to put in place to prevent this from occurring in the future?
This is John Turgo. More manpower, more equipment, more responsible people leading the team. This will not happen again.
Thank you.
This is Jay Turgo, effective immediately. Since my previous email this morning, I've put into place. I've already changed my scheduling. I've overstaffed. I've added equipment. I literally have equipment being delivered this afternoon. If you guys call for a 5-car accident at 76 East Mountain Main Street, you're going to have 5 trucks at that scene at the same time. And we're not going to have repeated processes where we have to step over one another to drop a vehicle and come back and et cetera. It's going to be handled in a timely and professional manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turgo. Any other board member who would like to be recognized to either offer an observation or ask a question on this matter? Do so by raising your hand and I'll recognize you. I see no other board member asking to be recognized at this time. This portion of the hearing is not only to inquire and deliberate, it is also the point where the board issues a decision in this matter. The board has before it 15 alleged violations. The way I see it, the board has the ability to determine that none of the violations occurred, that some of the violations occurred, certain violations occurred, or it has the ability to rule that all of the violations occurred. At this time, I'll open the floor to any board member who wants to make an observation as to any individual allegation or the allegation as a whole, and I'll entertain any motion with regard to whether or not the violations individually or as a whole are supported by the evidence. Councilman Kamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we move forward with making our decision, I respect Jay and John for standing up and admitting and acknowledging that there was problems with these allegations, and they apologized, and they also stated that moving forward that this will not happen again. So as we move forward, I'm hoping we as a board can consider those testimonies from those two. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kamer. Does any other board member wish to be recognized with regard to the decision in this matter? Mr. Lash.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to also reiterate what Councilman Kamer has shared, that I want to acknowledge Mr. Turgo, John Turgo, and Jay Turgo for acknowledging the mistakes and the mishaps that have occurred. It does take a lot of character to admit when there are flaws within a process. My question to you, Mr. Chair, are what are the parameters of our powers here this afternoon, if that is appropriate to discuss or share, so that we can determine something that is appropriate as relates to what has been shared with us this afternoon?
Would you want me to speak to that, Mr. Chair? Chris, you're muted. Sorry.
Mr. Lash, since you inquired at this time during this portion of the hearing, I'll tell you that each violation constitutes a first offense. And each violation is punishable by a fine of up to $100 per violation. And each violation is punishable by a license suspension of up to 5 days per violation. Those are the parameters in which the board can act on today. Before I close this portion of the hearing and make a motion, Captain Makosi, do you have any observations from the police department's end of this about Johnny's Towing and what has been represented today by Johnny's Towing?
Certainly. Our concern, our major concern and first concern is safety. And the issue for us is that it is critically important for an efficient response to these accidents to be able to get the vehicles out of the roadway, clear it, and make sure and ensure the safety of the public and the officers that are involved. When we have officers out on the highway sitting, trying to do traffic control there to protect people, 40 minutes, 35 minutes even, it's just really dangerous. To say nothing of the side streets, where we're also trying to deal with the debris that very well could cause yet another accident. These are all concerns of ours. So I do appreciate Mr. Turgo, both Mr. Turgos, for your acknowledgement of the situation. There's no way to argue against that. I appreciate that. But we really, and I don't know of any recent violations in the last couple of weeks that we've been made aware of. But the move to put in more equipment and more people has to be a long-term commitment. It can't be for today or for a couple of weeks. We really need those vehicles and those people ready to go all the time. That's what we need here in Akron. That's what we need to ensure the safety of our officers and of the motoring public.
Thank you, Captain Makosi. Before I make a motion for the board's consideration, is there any other observations or questions by a board member at this part? Hearing or seeing none. Sounds to me like we have addressed, at least so far at this hearing, the allegations as a whole. No individual allegation has been called out and addressed. Therefore, I believe, at least I'm going to make a motion along those same lines as to all 15 allegations as a whole. And I'm going to make a motion that all 15 violations are supported by the evidence. Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
Hearing a second. All in favor of a decision where today the violations as a whole were supported by the evidence? All in favor of that, respond by saying aye.
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 Any opposed to that finding today by the board? Hearing none, the board's decision unanimously will be that the violations that we heard today are supported by the evidence. So at this point, we'll move on to the penalty phase of the hearing, the final phase of the hearing. I'm going to open the floor up to the board for any questions, comments, or observations as to the penalty in this matter. As a whole, it would carry a fine up to $1,500. That's $100 per 15 violation, per violation, I mean. And a suspension of up to 75 days, which is 5 days per violation. Does anybody have any observations? Any board member have any observations about an appropriate penalty? I see Mr. Lash.
Mr. Chair, will that suggestion come from your office as far as the suggestion of penalty or from the board here?
That'll be a suggestion and a motion by the board. And approval by the board.
I see Mrs. Walsh has a comment or a question, so I will wait until after she gets done to propose something.
Certain. Thank you. Mrs. Walsh?
Yeah, I just have a question as to past practice. I mean, what have we done in this type of situation in the past, or is this a new situation for us?
Sure. My understanding is that there hasn't been a number of violations such as this. I'm going to defer to Mr. York, who may be the historian, or Mr. Kamer, who may be the historian of the board, to speak to that. Mr. York, Mr. Kamer, go ahead. You can go first.
I'll yield to Mr. York first.
Sure.
Mr. Reese is correct. The chair is correct. There haven't been a lot of matters that have developed to this extent. Most frequently, they are resolved without a hearing process. The most recent hearing I recall involved a complaint about one particular incident at a towing company, and I believe there was a fine issued, and I don't believe there was any days of suspension issued for that. But that would have been, I'm sorry about my recollection, it's not real clear, but that would have been about 6 to 8 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. York. Let me get the discussion started. If I was to suggest for discussion purposes a fine of $500 and 0 day suspension, can I hear from board members if they think there should be something more steep would be appropriate? Mr. Lash?
Mr. Chair, with the acknowledgement and apology of Mr. Turgo, I agree with said fine, seeing as though it could be as much as $1,400, $500 with the acknowledgement and apology, I think is fair. I would only add on that there be, if the rules allow, some type of probation so that we can monitor their progress.
Mr. Kamer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, Mr. Lash said it perfectly. I second with Mr. Lash, and I agree. Around a $500 penalty is suitable, and I definitely would not like to move forward with a suspension because of John and Jay, coming forward, admitting to this, and then also putting in place to move forward with hopefully making sure that this never happens again.
So I have proposed for discussion purposes a fine of $500. Does anybody wish to be heard? Any board member wish to be heard on whether the fine should be greater or less than $500? Seeing no hands, I will follow soon with a motion in that regard. I also threw out there for suggestion and discussion purposes only a suspension of 0 days. Does any board member have any comment or observation on whether there should be a suspension in this matter? Mr. Lash?
Mr. Chair, I agree with your sentiments as far as no suspension. I would only ask for a possible probation so that Johnny's is aware that we are watching the process and monitoring their progress as they have promised. That would be my only suggestion, but I do agree with your sentiments.
Thank you, Mr. Lash. Captain McCosy.
Yes, sir. As far as the suspension goes, I am comfortable with the 0 days. I think that, like the others have mentioned, that Mr. Turgo and Mr. Sergo have expressed their understanding and took responsibility for the situation. I think that fine is reasonable. And frankly, I do not believe that the suspension serves anybody's interest. And it will create quite a bit of work and quite a bit of problems for all of us. both here at the department, in the communications center, and of course, out on the road. So I am comfortable with that. I also believe that within the rules there are, or within the code, there's some language about a second or third offense that'll serve our needs just fine. We will continue to monitor this from the police department side. I know that Sergeant Lipa does that on a regular basis. And so certainly if there was a future problem, we'd be able to resolve that pretty quickly.
Thank you, Captain McCosy. Mr. York, when's the next regularly scheduled meeting? Is it in June?
It is June. Bear with me. June 14th.
Thank you. The reason I say that is, while I don't know if this board has the authority as a fine or a penalty to place a period of probation on Johnny's, I suggest that the police department report back to or give some type of a status report to the board, both in the June hearing and the hearing thereafter, as to, Johnny's activity following this hearing and whether they've been true to their word with regard to their performance. Sort of an informal probationary period. And hopefully we'll get favorable reports from the police department, or the board will get favorable reports. So that's a proposal that I make as chair. Does anybody have any comment on that?
Mr. Chair, if that's an official motion, I will second that.
Sure. Well, let me make a, thank you, Mr. Lash. I'll make an official motion at the penalty or fine portion of the hearing. I'm going to make a motion that the board impose a fine of $500 and a 0-day suspension for the allegations that we've heard today that were supported by the evidence. That motion's before the board. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of that fine or penalty, respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed to that fine and penalty, respond by saying nay. Having here none, the board's decision today with regard to a fine or a penalty will be $500 and a 0-day suspension. That concludes the hearing today before the board. Is there any other comment or matter that needs to come before the board today before our June meeting?
Mr. Chair, I would just like to point out for the Turgo's benefit, you will get written notice of the board's decision today. That'll be mailed to you in the next several days.
Thank you, Mr. York. Seeing no or hearing no further business for the board's attention today, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of ending the hearing and adjourning for the day until our June meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.